What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and I want to talk to you about a graphic novel that I finished reading yesterday. Thor, the Black Galaxy Saga. This is a good chunk of Thor comics. It collects issues 417 through 425 and part of issue 416. It's written by Tom DeFalco and co-plotted by Ron Frenz, and it is drawn by Ron Frenz and Gary Hartle. This is a very busy book. It's a very complicated book to talk about because there's a lot of stuff going on here. Usually when I do any kind of review, I very quickly will talk about the plot synopsis. This is what happened, and then I say this is what I liked and this is what I didn't like. That's going to be very difficult for me to do with this book because there is so much stuff going on. You compare this to like the early volumes of Walt Simonson's Thor Visionaries, where like the first volume of that run I think is about 12 issues long. That's about as long as this, but I feel like those books were easier to talk about than this. I don't feel like they were as crowded with subplot stuff going on, and I don't feel like they were as difficult for me to grasp what was going on, maybe. And it's going to be very tricky for me to come down one way or another on whether I like this book or not. I think by the end of this video, it's going to sound like I really didn't like this book, but I did like a lot of things about it. So I'm going to do my level best to try and quickly sum up the plot stuff, and as I go along, I'm going to say this is what I liked, this is what I didn't like. Number one, Thor in this book is Eric Masterson, and I guess there's a lot of people out there who really don't like Eric Masterson. He is not the real Thor. I assume there's people out there who they think of him as being to Thor what Azrael is to Batman. He's an imposter. He's not the real deal. I don't actually know if people think that, but I can only assume that people don't like Eric Masterson. And the big thing about him in this book is that he spends about half of the issues collected here fighting for custody of his son with his ex-wife. His ex-wife is a horrible human being who left him sometime before the events of this book, and in a flashback she actually tells him that their son just does not fit into her plans for her life right now. So she is an awful harpy of a person, and you don't want to see her win custody of their son. But at the same time, Eric is incapable of being a good father because he's also having to balance being Thor in his life. And so he disappears for hours at a time fighting different people as Thor, and then his secretary is saying, where in the world is Eric? And nobody can know that he's Thor, or at least he doesn't want these people to know. And finally, after spending issues and issues fighting Marcy on this, finally he comes in and says, Marcy, you can have our son. I can't be a good father. I can't be there for him right now. And he doesn't explain why, because he and Hercules have to go off into the middle of outer space to do some adventure, and he knows that he doesn't have a good excuse, so he just says, okay, you win the custody battle. And that was probably the most shocking thing for this subplot. It was a little bit of a slap in the face after having so much time be spent on this subplot to have him just give up so easily, but at the same time, that's probably the most sensible thing that he does in this entire book. So that's a big chunk of this book, or it feels like it's a big chunk of this book. And I honestly didn't care that much. By the time he decides that he's not going to try and fight this custody thing, I was a little heartbroken, but at the same time, I don't think that we needed to spend 5 issues or so on this custody battle just for it to end in this way. I think you honestly could have spent about 2 issues on this custody battle. Have him be fighting it really hard, and then he gets in a big battle as Thor, and he realizes that he can't keep his son safe. Also, at the very beginning, and in each issue here, you've got these backstories, or these little backup tales, I guess you could say, Tales of Asgard. And I'm not sure if this was going on a lot in the Thor series. I know it was not a thing during Walt Simonson's run, but I think it was a thing when Stan Lee was on the title in the 60s. But you've got these Tales of Asgard backup stories, and basically, Odin, I guess, has possessed the body of Surtur the Fire Giant. And stuff is going on. It's really confusing. Basically, he's acting very suspicious and very shady. And Lady Sif, she disappears with a couple of the Celtic gods. Laer, I think, is one of them, and Caber. She disappears with them and promises one of them that she will marry them, or marry him. But first, they have to help her with something. And then they disappear for like 80% of this book. And then they come back towards the end looking for Thor. And I'm thinking, okay, why were you not looking for Thor whenever you disappeared? Because he was on Earth whenever you left with those Celtic gods. So I don't really understand why you disappeared for the bulk of this book. But anyway, during all these backup stories, Tales of Asgard, Odin is acting extremely suspicious. And it turns out that, and this is, if I understand this correctly, this is where things got a little hazy for me. Basically, the legends say that Ragnarok, the death of all of the Norse gods, will only happen when Surtur and Ymir the Frost Giant fight each other to the death, and all the gods will die after these two have a big dukeroo. So Odin has somehow possessed the body of Surtur, and basically he wants to get this fight going so that he can somehow stop Ragnarok from actually happening. Maybe he thinks if he can actually kill Ymir the Frost Giant, then he will stop Ragnarok, and he will basically free all of the Norse gods from their destiny. This is a really cool idea that I like a lot. Unfortunately, it is present in less than 10% of this book. It's a really awesome idea that does not get any exploration at all. And that's an idea that was present a little bit in the Jim Krueger Earth X mega series. I don't remember if it was Earth X or Universe X, but there was this scene where Loki was talking to Surtur, and not in this book, in the Universe X, I think, where he says, listen, Ragnarok has already happened. We do not have to follow our path anymore. We do not have to do what we were destined to do. I don't have to be the bad guy anymore. We can do whatever we want to do. And I like the idea of the Norse gods having freedom of choice. One of my big problems with Thor as a concept at Marvel Comics is that it feels bound to the mythology, where no matter what Jason Aaron is doing on Thor this month, you've got Ragnarok sometime in the future where all these characters are going to die. If you're reading, say, a Batman comic or a Spider-Man comic, you don't have that. You're a lot more free with where the characters can go. And so I like the idea of DeFalco, Friends, and Hartle trying to free the Thor characters here from Ragnarok. I like that idea. Unfortunately, that only takes up a very little bit of this entire book. In fact, it is a subplot throughout this entire book until the very last issue here, where it becomes the main plot of the book. And I say that it was kind of difficult to understand because while I say that Odin apparently had only possessed Surtur, because then at one point they light Surtur's sword on fire, and then suddenly Surtur is acting like he's just regular Surtur, and then both he and Ymir are seemingly defeated, and then Odin just kind of comes out of nowhere, and they say that he's split off from Surtur's body. So I don't understand what's going on. I don't understand if Odin was like inside Surtur's brain, like pulling these strings to make Surtur act this way. I don't understand. None of this made any sense to me. Odin has two eyes here. I don't get that. The last time, bear in mind, chronologically speaking, the previous Thor story that has been collected before this is the Walt Simonson run. And there, Odin was presumed dead and he had one eye. So there's a good chunk of Thor comics that happened in between Simonson's run and the Black Galaxy Saga, where apparently some weird stuff went down. And I don't understand a lot of the Odin stuff, although I really wanted to because that was some of my favorite stuff in this book. Getting past all the subplot stuff, because really all that I've talked about so far is just subplots. Getting onto the main plot of the book itself, you've got a couple of issues where Thor and Hercules are fighting this character called Stellaris. Let me see if Stellaris is anywhere on here. I don't see Stellaris on either the back or front cover. Stellaris basically is an alien being, and the Celestials, those giant armor-clad aliens who never talk, they destroyed her planet. And the Celestials have always kind of been a bit of an enigma. We don't really know why they do this, but they will go to a planet and they will either, they'll do this number or they'll do this number. And then if they do this number, they're destroying the entire planet. And that's kind of been an ongoing threat for the Marvel Universe for a very long time. Rick Remender's Uncanny X-Force, Archangel's whole motivation was trying to prevent that from happening to planet Earth. So that's been a thing for a very long time. And this girl, she wants to kill the Celestials because her planet was destroyed. And she is one of the most annoying characters that I've ever read in a comic book in a very, very long time. Her motivation makes sense. It's very sound. Unfortunately, when this character is first introduced, they're trying to make us think that Stellaris is a guy because she has this big mask on and everyone keeps saying he is doing this and he is doing that. And then whenever her mask gets knocked off, everybody's like, oh, she's a girl? And I'm just like, who cares? You don't have to do a big reveal and say, look, Stellaris is a girl. That's a big twist. I feel like that's a very weak twist as far as twists go. Number two, before she is unmasked, she talks like Yoda some of the time. She will switch her nouns and verbs around, and it's incredibly annoying to read this speech pattern here, especially because it is not consistent. Sometimes she talks like Yoda, sometimes she talks like a normal person. She has this really annoying habit of calling any dude beauty boy. It's really weird. She calls Hercules that, she calls Thor that. There's this Thor clone who works for the Celestials. She calls that guy beauty boy. She's just a very annoying character, and I honestly feel like they could have tried really hard to have just removed her from the plot entirely, because she shows up here, she's trying to kill Hercules because sometime earlier Hercules was around the Celestials for a long time, and so he stank of the Celestials, and so she's over here thinking, well, I have to kill him because he kind of smells like the Celestials, even though Hercules never at any point destroyed her planet. Her whole motivation is killing the people who destroyed her planet, so Hercules didn't have anything to do with that. She shouldn't be trying to kill this guy. But that is the crux of like 2 issues of this book, and then finally she's like, okay, I'm gonna leave because you guys almost defeated me. And then Thor and Hercules, they get summoned to the Black Galaxy, which is this big living galaxy. It doesn't have actual stars, it has living matter, and that is all a whole bunch of nonsense that doesn't make any sense at all. And basically, you've got the High Evolutionary, that's him right here with the purple helmet thing. A better look at him is here. The High Evolutionary is over here, and he is allegedly looking for a way to advance the human species because he sees that the human species is about to hit an evolutionary dead end. And I thought that was very interesting. Because, sorry, my voice is starting to go out. I thought it was very interesting that the High Evolutionary is looking for a way to advance the human species, because that is all some stuff that will be very hard hitting the X-Men books about 10 or 15 years after this storyline. Grant Morrison's new X-Men run is all built around the human species is going to die in about 3 generations. And then, like I mentioned, Rick Remender's Uncanny X-Force, where Archangel is trying to kickstart the planet and jump it forward so that the Celestials don't destroy the entire planet. And here we have the High Evolutionary basically trying to do that. He wants to save the human species. It's just that he doesn't care who gets in his way while he does that. So if Hercules or Eric Masterson have to die in order for him to save the entire human species, he doesn't really care as long as he can save the human species. And I thought that that was a very interesting take on the High Evolutionary, because he's a character who I've never been able to put my finger on whether he's a good guy or a bad guy. Sometimes he acts a little bit more like a good guy, sometimes he acts a little bit more villainous. In the early Adam Warlock comics, he kind of sort of acted like a good guy, but then at times he kind of sort of acted a little more villainous. So I like this take on the character. So he is hanging out in the middle of space looking for a way to jumpstart the human species, and meanwhile, he has created a few immortals. He's created basically new gods, if you will, not to be confused with the Jack Kirby new gods from DC Comics. And one of them, who is just a complete psychopath, it turns out he was cloned from Thor, but he was cloned from Thor at a time when Thor was possessed by Loki. So he's actually a clone of Thor and Loki. And so Thor is very mad at the High Evolutionary for unleashing this unstable, crazy guy onto the universe, who could at any moment go into one of his violent rages. And he's created these guys, and I guess these are his way of advancing the human species. He's just going to create a brand new species. And he does that all the time. There's like 3 different species that he's created that are present in this book. There's the animal people who were there in the 1970s Spider-Woman comics and the Adam Warlock comics. And then there's the new men who are like evolved animal people who look like human beings. And one of them, his name is Count Tagar, and he looks like a normal person. And then at one point, we make a really huge deal about how he jumps into this pool that's supposed to evolve people and take them to the next level. And then he becomes this weird-looking cat creature, kind of looks like Kai Lun from the Excalibur comics. And that doesn't ever lead to anything at all. He evolves himself into this weird cat creature, and then nothing comes of it. I was expecting him to end up being a secondary bad guy here. He doesn't do anything after he evolves himself into that weird cat creature. So these guys are all hanging out in the Black Galaxy, and basically the main plot at this point is the Celestials are using all of the living energy of the Black Galaxy to create a new Celestial. And then the reason that Thor is trying to stop this is because they have kidnapped his human half, Eric Masterson, and Hercules, and then the High Evolutionary is like, no, you have to stop Thor. Don't let him stop those guys from getting killed. And then Stellaris, she's there, and she's trying to kill this Celestial before it can be born, and then I think she winds up getting destroyed, and then there's this one guy, the Recorder, he's this robot right here, and then he's talking about why did Stellaris have the same armor as the Celestials? And he's asking all of these questions that I assume people reading the storyline are asking these questions. questions, like why is Stellaris' armor so similar to the Celestials, and all these plot questions that really make no sense at all, and these questions have no answer. When he's asking these questions out loud, nobody is there to say, well, her armor came from da-da-da-da-da. Nobody's there to answer these questions. So these plot holes are all just there at the end of this book. But basically, by the end of the book, a new Celestial is born. It flies off with all the other Celestials. Eric Masterson and Thor, they're able to be rejoined. Hercules is fine. He had a piece of him missing since before the events of this book that kind of put him into a little bit of a depressive funk. He's now fine. He doesn't have a piece of him missing anymore. The High Evolutionary is now kind of sad and depressed because he was not deemed worthy by the Celestials as being the most evolved person there. Basically, this book is just a big, huge mess. And like I said, there's a lot of stuff that I like here. I really like the idea of Odin trying to sidestep destiny for all of Asgard. Unfortunately, that is only a thing in like the last 3 issues, and even then, only in the backup stories in the last 2 of those issues. I also really like the High Evolutionary still kind of being shady. I still don't know if he would be a bad guy or a good guy, because his endgame is very just. It's very noble, but at the same time, he's acting very villainous trying to accomplish that. I really like that. Unfortunately, just about everything else here is just kind of messy and sloppy. It all takes a very long time to get to a short point. I feel like this could have been at least 3 issues shorter, and they could have taken out Stellaris entirely, and you would have had virtually the same story. But overall, I wanted to like this story. I really had no idea what I was getting into when I read it, but unfortunately, it's just not that good of a story. So if you are looking for a good Thor story, maybe you've read some of the other stuff that everyone says is like the best Thor stories, and you're looking for something else to whet your Thor palate, I would say skip Thor the Black Galaxy Saga, unfortunately. Those are my very lengthy thoughts on Thor the Black Galaxy Saga. I hope that you guys liked this review. If you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the future with other videos. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.